Ridge Mountains are a very old place. Long before roads, towns, or park ranger stations existed, these mountains were already standing tall. Trees grew thick and close together. Streams cut quietly through stone, and animals learned every path and hiding place. Even today, when people visit the Blue Ridge Mountains, many say the forest feels different from other places. It feels like it is watching. This story begins on a calm evening, just as the sun was starting to sink behind the mountains. The sky was painted with soft orange and purple colors, and long shadows stretched across the forest floor. Inside a small wooden ranger station sat a park ranger finishing his paperwork for the day. His job was to protect the forest and the people who came to enjoy it. He had worked there for many years and thought he understood the woods better than most people. The ranger believed that almost everything in the forest had a logical explanation. Strange noises usually meant animals. Broken branches were often caused by storms. Even frightened hikers often imagined things when they were tired or lost. Experience had taught him to stay calm and think clearly. Just as he was getting ready to turn off the lights and head home, the phone rang. The sound was sharp and sudden, echoing through the quiet station. The ranger paused, surprised. Calls rarely came in this late unless someone was lost or hurt. He picked up the phone and said, "Ranger Station, how can I help you?" At first, there was only heavy breathing on the other end. Then a man's voice spoke, shaky and scared. "There's something wrong out here," the man said. The ranger straightened in his chair. "Sir, take a deep breath. Where are you?" "I'm on the old service trail," the man replied. "I've hiked here for years. I know this place. But I saw footprints, and they aren't right." The ranger grabbed a pen and began writing notes. "Footprints? Can you tell me what kind? Bear? Elk?" "No," the man whispered. "Not like that. They look like feet, but not human. Too long, too deep, and they just stop, like whatever made them disappeared." Before the ranger could ask another question, the line went dead. "Hello?" the ranger said. "Sir, are you still there?" There was no answer. The ranger slowly set the phone down. Calls like that were rare, but not unheard of. People sometimes panicked when they were alone in the woods. Still, something about the man's voice stayed with him. It wasn't just fear. It sounded like confusion mixed with certainty, as if the man knew exactly what he had seen and knew it wasn't normal. After a moment of thought, the ranger grabbed his jacket, flashlight, and camera. He locked the station and drove toward the trailhead. As he went, the forest grew darker and quieter. The radio played softly, but even that seemed too loud in the stillness. When he arrived, the trailhead was empty. No cars, no voices, only trees standing close together like silent guards. The ranger turned off the engine and listened. No insects buzzed, no owls hooted. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. He followed the trail using his flashlight, the beam bouncing over roots and rocks. After several minutes, he saw them. Footprints. They were pressed deep into the soft earth, clear and fresh. The ranger crouched down to look closely. The shape was wrong. Each print was longer than a human foot, with toes that stretched too far forward. The heel was narrow, and the step between prints was too long for a normal person. "What made you?" the ranger whispered to himself. He took photos and measured the distance between the prints. They followed the trail for several yards, then suddenly stopped. There were no signs of running, no broken branches, no slide marks. It was as if the thing that made them had simply vanished. As the ranger stood up, a sound came from the trees. Step, then another. Slow, careful. The ranger turned, shining his flashlight into the darkness. The beam showed only trees and mist, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. His heart began to pound. "Is someone there?" he called out. No answer came. The footsteps stopped. The ranger waited for a long moment, then slowly backed away. He did not run. Running in the woods at night was dangerous. Instead, he walked calmly but quickly back toward his truck, keeping the flashlight steady. When he reached the trailhead, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were new footprints near his truck. The same long, deep prints. They were facing the road, as if whatever made them had been watching him leave. The
ranger drove away without looking back, his hands tight on the steering wheel. That night, as he lay in bed, he kept seeing the footprints in his mind. He told himself there was a simple explanation. There always was. But deep down, a small voice whispered that this was only the beginning.
The next morning, the ranger woke earlier than usual. Sunlight filtered through his cabin window, but it did not bring the comfort it normally did. His sleep had been restless, filled with dreams of endless trees and footsteps following just behind him. Even after waking, the feeling stayed with him, like a heavy coat he could not take off. He made a simple breakfast and tried to focus on normal things. Birds chirped outside, and everything looked peaceful. For a moment, he wondered if the strange footprints had been his imagination. But when he remembered how deep they were pressed into the ground, he knew they had been real. By mid-morning, the ranger decided to return to the trail. He told himself that daylight would make everything clearer. Strange things often seem less frightening when the sun is shining. When he arrived at the trailhead, he noticed something unusual right away. The air felt thick and still, even though the weather report said there should be a breeze. The forest seemed quieter than it should have been. Usually during the day, insects buzzed and birds called to each other. Now there was only silence. He walked carefully down the same trail as the night before. After a few minutes, he saw the footprints again. They were still there. The ranger frowned. It had rained lightly during the night. Rain should have softened the edges of the footprints or washed them away completely. But these prints looked almost untouched, as clear as they had been before. He knelt down and touched the soil beside one print. The ground was damp, but firm. "That doesn't make sense," he murmured. As he followed the trail, he began noticing more strange signs. High on one tree, far above where a person could easily reach, the bark had been stripped away. On another tree, branches had been bent and twisted together, forming a shape that looked almost like a symbol. The ranger took pictures and wrote notes, his uneasiness growing with every step. "This doesn't look like animal damage," he said quietly. Animals did not make patterns. They did not bend branches carefully or leave marks in neat places. Suddenly, his radio crackled. "Psst, psst, Ranger. Psst, psst." He lifted the radio quickly. "This is Ranger Collins. I read you. Go ahead." Only static answered him. Then, through the noise, a voice came through. Soft. Familiar. Collins. The ranger froze. That was his last name. "Who is this?" he asked. There was no reply. The radio went silent. His heart beat faster. Radios sometimes picked up strange signals, but this felt different. The voice had sounded close. Too close. He continued walking, trying to stay calm. That was when he noticed the trail markers. The small metal signs that helped hikers stay on the right path were wrong. One pointed in the opposite direction. Another was missing completely. "I didn't move these," the ranger whispered. As he stepped off the main trail to check the area, he smelled smoke. Not old smoke, fresh smoke. He followed the smell until he reached a small clearing. There he found a campsite. A tent lay half collapsed. A backpack rested against a log. Near the center of the clearing was a fire pit, with dark ashes and faint warmth still rising from the stones. "Hello?" the ranger called. "Ranger service. Is anyone here?" No one answered. He checked the campsite carefully. Everything looked normal, yet something felt wrong. There were boots beside the tent, neatly placed. Food sat out in the open, untouched by animals. Even a water bottle stood upright, as if its owner had just set it down. Then the ranger noticed the footprints. They circled the campsite. They did not enter it. The ranger's stomach tightened. "You were watching."
cold breeze passed through the clearing, rustling the leaves. For a brief moment, the ranger felt like he was standing in the middle of a giant eye, seen from every direction. He took more photos and marked the location on his map. His hands trembled slightly, and he had to pause to steady his breathing. As he turned to leave, he heard again. Footsteps. Not running, not rushing. Walking. Matching his pace. The ranger did not look back. He walked steadily until the sound faded. Only then did he stop and listen. The forest was silent once more. By the time he returned to his truck, the ranger knew something important had changed. This was no longer just a strange report. Whatever was leaving those footprints was smart. It could watch, wait, and move without being seen. As he drove away, he made a decision. He would not tell the full story yet, not until he understood more, but deep inside he feared that understanding might come too late. The forest, he realized, was not just a place. It was a where.
After the unsettling experience at the empty campsite, the ranger knew he could not face this mystery alone. The footprints, the strange circle around the tent, the silent forest, it all suggested intelligence behind the events. And he realized that understanding the past might help him comprehend what was happening now. He decided to reach out to the people who had lived near the Blue Ridge Mountains for generations. People who had stories that were never written down, but passed quietly from one elder to another. He drove through winding mountain roads to a small village at the edge of the forest. The houses were scattered, wooden and weathered, many with porches that creaked when the wind blew. As he walked along the narrow streets, he noticed elderly men and women sitting outside, talking in hushed tones. Their eyes, curious yet wary, followed him. The ranger introduced himself politely and explained that he had found something strange in the forest. Most of them shook their heads or muttered that it was best not to talk about the woods, warning him not to go too deep. Eventually, a kindly older woman beckoned him closer. Her hair was silver, pulled back into a neat bun, and her eyes held the sharpness of someone who had seen far more than they revealed. She invited him inside and offered warm tea. The smell of herbs and wood smoke filled the small kitchen. He explained the campsite, the footprints, and the strange signs in the forest. The woman nodded slowly, listening carefully, never interrupting. Finally, she spoke. "The forest keeps secrets," she said in a low, serious voice. "Some paths are not meant to be followed. The footprints you saw, they belong to something that is not quite human, something that watches. We call them the Watchers, and they are clever. They learn from people, from sounds, from the way we walk. They are patient, they do not hurry, and they do not strike unless provoked or curious." The ranger leaned forward, listening intently. The woman continued. "Long ago, our families learned to leave markers, signs, and warnings. Some even avoid certain clearings entirely. The Watchers know the forest better than any human. They know when someone is near. If you are careless, they will observe, test, and sometimes lead you where you should not go." She drew a simple map on a scrap of paper, marking areas where disappearances had occurred, areas that were avoided by her ancestors, and places that were rumored to be the territory of these Watchers. Every marked spot coincided with the ranger's experiences. He felt a chill as he realized the empty campsite, the footprints, and the circle around the tent were part of a larger pattern, a behavior that had been repeating for generations. That evening, the ranger returned to his cabin, the old woman's warnings echoing in his mind. He reviewed the photographs and notes from the campsite, cross-referencing them with the map. Every detail, from the size and spacing of the footprints to the strange marks on the trees, seemed deliberate. The forest was not random. It was organized, intelligent, and patient. The night brought restless dreams. The ranger found himself back in the clearing of the campsite, walking in circles. He felt eyes on him, unseen and heavy, watching his every move. Shapes flickered in the shadows, distant but present, moving silently among the trees. He awoke with a start, the memory of the dream pressing on him as though it were more than imagination. Morning arrived, pale and gray, with mist curling along the mountainside. He knew he had to return to the forest. Armed with the knowledge he had gained from the villagers, he hoped to find more clues, more understanding.
He packed carefully, taking extra supplies, a stronger flashlight, a compass, and the small notebook filled with observations. He told himself he would be careful, respectful, and attentive to every sound and movement. As he entered the forest, the familiar trail now felt different. The shadows seemed to move with a purpose, the trees bending subtly as if leaning to watch him. Each step he took was measured, deliberate, his senses heightened by the warnings he had received. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt through him. The forest was alive, and he was aware that something watched, cataloging his movements, studying his reactions. After walking for some time, he found a series of strange symbols carved into the bark of several trees. They were crude but intentional, resembling humanoid shapes and abstract patterns. The ranger remembered the old woman's warnings, markers left by others to indicate the presence of watchers. He photographed each one carefully, making sketches in his notebook. He noted the direction of the symbols, the spacing, and the angles, trying to understand what message they might convey. Each carving seemed to tell a story, a warning, a record of past encounters with the watchers. As the day progressed, he noticed subtle changes in the forest. The light seemed dimmer than it should be. Shadows shifted unnaturally. The birds were silent, and the usual rustle of small animals had vanished. It was as if the entire forest had gone quiet to observe him. He pressed on, each step filled with growing anticipation and fear, but also curiosity. The ranger knew that understanding these signs, the patterns of the footprints, and the behavior of the watchers was crucial. He could not turn back now. At one point, he discovered another abandoned campsite. This one was older, overgrown with moss and small saplings, yet the signs of observation were clear. Rocks were stacked in geometric patterns. Twigs were tied into shapes resembling eyes. Footprints, faint but visible, circled the clearing. The ranger recognized the same deliberate pattern he had seen before. The watchers were patient, meticulous, and observant. He noted every detail, careful not to disturb the sight. Hours passed, and as evening approached, the forest grew darker and colder. Mist began to creep along the ground, curling around tree trunks and hiding the uneven terrain. The ranger paused on a small ridge, looking down at a familiar clearing. His heart pounded as he realized it was the same campsite he had seen earlier, only from a higher perspective. The circular footprints were visible even from this distance, perfectly preserved. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what he would do next. The ranger realized that he was no longer just an observer. He was part of the forest now, part of the pattern, and the watchers were aware of his presence. Every decision, every step, was being monitored. He knew he had to act with caution, respect, and intelligence. The forest was teaching him, testing him, and he had to be careful not to fail. As night fell, he made camp at a safe distance from the clearing. He reviewed his notes, sketches, and photographs by the dim light of his lantern. The forest around him was silent, yet he could feel the presence of the watchers nearby. He set up his tent carefully, ensuring it was secure, and placed small markers around his perimeter to alert him to movement. Sleep came slowly, filled with vivid dreams of footsteps, shadows, and the quiet, intelligent eyes of the forest. By morning, the ranger was determined. The old warnings were real, the watchers were real, and he was committed to understanding them, documenting them, and sharing the truth with those who would listen. The Blue Ridge Mountains held secrets that were old, patient, and unseen, and the ranger had only just begun to uncover them. He stepped into the forest once more, ready to continue his investigation, aware that the watchers were always near, observing, learning, and waiting for what he would do next.
The ranger felt nervous and excited as he prepared for his first night patrol. He had seen strange footprints in the forest, and the villagers had told him about the watchers that lived deep in the woods. These were not ordinary animals. They were clever, quiet, and they watched anyone who came too close. Tonight, he wanted to see them for himself. He packed his backpack carefully. Inside were his flashlight, extra batteries, a compass, his notebook, and a few snacks. He made sure everything was ready. The sun was disappearing behind the mountains, turning the sky bright orange and then deep purple. Shadows stretched long and dark across the forest floor. The ranger took a deep breath and stepped onto the trail. The forest looked different at night. Trees that seemed normal in the daytime now appeared huge and shadowy. Their branches reached out like arms. Leaves rustled softly in the quiet breeze. Every sound seemed louder and closer than usual. Even the usual chirping of birds and buzzing of insects had stopped. The forest felt very still. almost like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The ranger walked slowly, shining his flashlight ahead. The beam of light only reached a little way, leaving most of the forest in darkness. Every little snap of a twig made his heart jump. His boots pressed softly into the damp earth. He moved carefully, trying not to make too much noise, because he knew that something might be watching him. And in this forest, he realized he was not alone. After walking for a while, he thought he saw movement between the trees. Shadows flickered, moving quickly but quietly. He tried to look closer, but when he turned his flashlight there, nothing was there. The forest seemed to play tricks on him, hiding things in plain sight. He reminded himself to stay calm. The watchers were clever, and they were probably studying him too. Suddenly, he heard a soft sound behind him. Step, step, step. It was slow and deliberate, just like his own footsteps. The ranger froze. He did not move or turn. He remembered the villagers' warning. The watchers could copy sounds and follow quietly. If he panicked, it might make them curious, and curiosity could be dangerous. So he stayed very still and listened. The footsteps continued, matching his pace exactly. He could feel his heart beating fast, but he kept walking slowly. He whispered to himself, "Stay calm, stay calm." Every time he looked around, there was nothing, just the dark shapes of trees and the shadows between them. But he could feel eyes on him. He could feel that he was being watched. A little later, he saw a tall, dark shape standing between the trees. At first it didn't move. It looked like a tree trunk or a shadow, but it was too straight and too tall to be part of the forest. The ranger remembered the stories. The watchers were clever and could hide in the shadows. He held his flashlight steady and spoke softly. "Who's there?" The forest answered only with quiet. Nothing moved, nothing spoke, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Then the shape moved, not quickly, but smoothly, almost like it was floating. It disappeared into the trees before he could get a clear look. The ranger shone his flashlight everywhere, but only shadows were left behind. His hands shook slightly, but he knew he had to be brave. He knelt down and looked at the ground. There they were, the footprints. They were fresh, long, deep, and strange. Too big for a person, too careful for an animal. And just like before, they ended suddenly, as if the creature that made them could vanish at will. He traced the footprints carefully, taking notes in his notebook. He measured their size and wrote down how far apart they were. The forest felt alive around him. Every sound of leaves or twigs seemed important. Every shadow looked like it could move. He realized that the watchers were smart. They could see him, understand him, and learn from everything he did. The ranger kept walking slowly, deeper into the forest. Hours passed, and the darkness seemed to stretch forever. Shapes moved just at the edge of his vision. Branches bent and leaves rustled, but nothing ever came close. Sometimes he thought he saw eyes glimmering in the dark. Other times he heard whispers that sounded almost like human voices. He remembered the villagers' warning that the watchers could copy voices. He whispered to himself to stay calm. The forest was testing him, and he had to be careful. At one point he heard a voice on his radio, soft and distant. It sounded like another ranger calling him. "Collins, Collins, come here." His heart raced, but he knew he was alone. There was no one there. The watchers could imitate sounds, and this was part of their cleverness. He wrote it all down in his notebook, recording the time and direction. This was important. Every little thing he noticed might help him understand what the watchers were doing. As the night went on, the ranger walked carefully, listening and observing. The forest had rules he didn't know yet. Every step he took mattered. Every sound mattered. And slowly, he began to feel part of the forest. He could sense the watchers' attention, and he realized that if he moved carefully and stayed calm, he might survive and learn the secrets of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Finally, as the sky started to turn gray with the first hints of dawn, the ranger returned to the main trail. The forest still seemed alive and watchful, but he felt a little safer in the growing light. He had learned a lot tonight. The watchers were real. They were intelligent. They were patient, and they were always watching. But he had also learned that with patience, courage, and careful observation,
he could move through the forest safely and begin to understand its secrets. Back at his cabin, he reviewed his notes, sketches, and photographs. Every detail, every footprint, and every shadow told him one thing. The forest was alive in ways he could not yet fully understand. The Watchers were clever, quiet, and mysterious, and the Ranger knew that he had only begun to uncover the mysteries of the Blue Ridge Woods. That night, even in his bed, he could still hear the soft echo of footsteps in the distance, the whispers of leaves, and the watchful presence of the forest. He had entered a world of secrets and shadows, and there was no turning back.
The forest had a way of changing at night. When the sun disappeared behind the mountains, shadows stretched long and dark, and every small sound seemed louder. The ranger had learned this on his first night patrol. He knew now that the Blue Ridge Woods were alive, full of watchers that moved silently, observing everything. He had seen strange footprints, abandoned campsites, and subtle signs of intelligence. But tonight, he would experience something even stranger. The Watchers could imitate voices. The ranger left his cabin after dusk, walking carefully along the familiar trail. His backpack carried his flashlight, extra batteries, notebook, and a few snacks. His heart beat quickly. He had walked these paths many times before, but tonight he felt different. The forest seemed heavier, quieter, as if it were waiting for him. Every step he took seemed amplified in the silence. Even the wind sounded different, softer, whispering through the needles and leaves. He kept telling himself to stay calm, to breathe slowly, and to pay attention. As he moved deeper into the forest, shadows twisted in the moonlight. Shapes shifted between the trees. He imagined eyes peeking at him from the darkness. Every snap of a twig made him jump slightly, but he reminded himself to stay still and steady. He had learned that sudden movements could draw attention, and the Watchers were clever. They noticed everything. Suddenly, his radio crackled. Static hissed, then a soft voice came through. Collins, come here. The ranger's heart jumped. That was his name. His pulse raced. He looked around, shining his flashlight into the darkness. There was no one there. He reminded himself to think clearly. It was possible the voice was not human, but something imitating a human. The Watchers could mimic sounds, and now he realized that the forest was testing him. Who's there? He called softly, trying not to sound frightened. Only silence answered. Then again, faintly, he heard it. Collins, over here. Come closer. It sounded exactly like another ranger who sometimes worked in the area. The voice was gentle, familiar, and strangely comforting. But he knew it was a trick. The Watchers were learning from him. They were clever enough to copy voices to confuse and observe him. The ranger made a careful note in his notebook, writing the time and direction. Every detail mattered. He moved slowly, shining his flashlight around the trees. The shadows seemed to shift with him. Branches bent as if someone, or something, was hiding behind them. Leaves rustled, and the sound of footsteps echoed softly around him. He remembered the old villagers' warnings. The Watchers are patient. They do not attack immediately. They observe, learn, and sometimes test you. Tonight, he understood that lesson more clearly than ever. A shape suddenly appeared between two trees. At first, it looked like a person standing in the shadows. The ranger froze, trying to control his breathing. Then, in a soft voice, it spoke. Don't be afraid. The ranger swung his flashlight, but nothing was there. Only trees and darkness. He realized again that the Watchers could mimic humans. They could sound real, but they were not truly there. It was clever, and it was unsettling.
He felt a chill, but he also felt a strange curiosity. He wanted to learn more. He decided to move carefully forward, keeping his flashlight steady. He made deliberate steps, listening to every sound, noting every shadow. The forest felt alive around him. Each time he heard a voice, I ignored it, observing instead where it came from. Sometimes the voice seemed to echo from one direction, then another, making it impossible to track. I realized the watchers were intelligent, able to confuse him without revealing themselves directly. Hours passed. The moon climbed higher in the sky, casting silver light across the forest floor. The ranger noticed more signs of movement. Small footprints beside the trail, marks on tree trunks, bent branches forming almost symbolic shapes. Each sign told a story. Each was a warning or a test. He documented everything, drawing sketches in his notebook, taking pictures, and making careful notes about the direction and pattern of every footprint or mark. Then, something even stranger happened. As he paused near a small clearing, I thought he heard laughter. Soft, childlike, almost playful. He spun around, flashlight sweeping across the trees. But there was nothing there. The clearing was empty, the leaves unmoved. My mind raced, but he reminded himself, these are the watchers. They observe, they imitate, they test your reactions. He took slow breaths, forcing himself to stay calm. Walking onward, he began noticing patterns in the imitations. Sometimes the voices whispered his name. Sometimes they mimicked bird calls, or even the sound of distant footsteps. The forest became a symphony of sounds, some real, some tricks. The ranger realized that the watchers were teaching him to notice carefully, to distinguish real danger from clever illusions. His notebook filled with observations, voice imitations, patterns in footprints, the spacing of marks on trees, the timing of sounds. He continued through the night, moving slowly and deliberately. The shadows stretched long and twisted. Trees seemed to bend slightly as he passed, almost as if observing him. Branches brushed against his arms. Twigs snapped underfoot. And somewhere in the darkness, a soft rustling followed him. He reminded himself to stay calm. He kept notes of every sound, every movement, and every strange feeling. The forest was alive, intelligent, and patient. He was learning how to navigate it safely. As the first hint of dawn appeared, painting the sky pale orange and pink, the ranger returned to the main trail. He looked back toward the forest and saw the shadows still shifting, even in daylight. The voices were gone, replaced by silence, but he knew the watchers were still there, hidden in the trees, observing and learning. They were clever, patient, and mysterious, and the ranger understood that the forest had much more to teach him. Back at his cabin, he reviewed his notes, drawings, and photographs. He recorded everything carefully. The footsteps, the imitated voices, the strange shadows, and the subtle movements of branches. He wrote down his thoughts and reflections, realizing that the watchers were not mean or cruel. They were simply intelligent and aware. They wanted to test, to observe, and perhaps to protect their forest in their own strange way. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought of the voices, the shadows, and the small, clever footprints. He could almost hear the forest breathing, alive with quiet intelligence. He knew that he had to continue learning, to be patient and careful, and to respect the watchers. And he also knew that his adventure was only just beginning. The Blue Ridge forests were full of secrets, and the watchers were only starting to show him what they could do.
The morning after the night of the imitated voices, the ranger woke very early. The sky outside his cabin was still painted with pale streaks of pink and orange as the first light of dawn slowly peeked over the mountains. His mind was buzzing with everything he had experienced the night before. Strange footprints, soft voices, shadows that seemed to move by themselves. It had all been incredible. But what stayed in his mind the most was the thought that the watchers were intelligent. They were clever, patient, and had been observing him the whole time. They were teaching him something, but he wasn't yet sure what. After a quick breakfast of warm oatmeal and tea, the ranger packed his backpack carefully. Flashlight? Check. Extra batteries? Check. Notebook and pencils? Check. Water bottle and a small snack? Check. He even tucked in a small magnifying glass for examining tracks and patterns on the forest floor. Today, he thought, he would try to pay attention to even the smallest details in the forest. Every leaf, every twig, every shadow might hold a clue. As he stepped onto the trail, the forest seemed alive in a very different way than it had during the day. The birds chirped softly, but it was a quiet, calm sound. The wind whispered gently through the trees, rustling the leaves in a soft, almost musical way. He could smell the damp earth, the scent of moss, and the faint sweetness of pine needles. Everything felt peaceful, yet there was an undercurrent of mystery. The forest felt as though it were breathing around him, and he knew that something or someone was watching. The first thing he noticed were the footprints. They were faint, almost blending into the soft soil, but he could see them clearly when he looked closely. They were the same kind he had seen during the night patrol. Big, long, and unlike any human or normal animal. He knelt down, studying them with a magnifying glass. They curved gently around small clearings and over fallen branches. Some were so faint he almost missed them. It was as if whoever made them wanted him to notice, but only if he looked carefully. The ranger began following the footprints, moving slowly and deliberately. He felt like he was stepping into a secret world. Each step was soft and careful, so he wouldn't disturb the patterns on the ground. Every time he saw a footprint, he paused. He measured it, sketched it in his notebook, and wrote down notes about how far apart each step was. He noticed small scratches on the trees nearby, marks on rocks, and even slight depressions in the moss. Everything was intentional. Everything had a purpose. After walking for some time, he came to a small clearing that he had never noticed before. Sunlight poured through the trees, forming little beams of gold and orange on the forest floor. In the center of the clearing, he saw stones stacked in a circle, like a small monument. Around the circle, sticks and twigs were arranged into shapes, triangles, arrows, and small, neat patterns. The ranger crouched down carefully to examine the markings. He realized that these were not random. They were signs, markers, or messages left by the watchers. Maybe they were teaching him, or maybe they were showing him which paths were safe to follow. He took photographs, drew sketches, and wrote careful notes in his notebook. Each mark, each stick, each stone told a story. He could imagine the watchers moving silently through the trees, bending branches and arranging sticks with careful patience. He realized that they had been doing this for a long time. They knew the forest better than any human ever could, and they were using it to communicate, to teach, and to observe. He followed another path indicated by an arrow made of sticks. It led him to a fallen tree, its thick trunk creating a branch over a small bubbling stream. Water flowed quietly beneath, making soft splashing sounds that mixed with the rustle of leaves. As he stepped carefully across the trunk, he noticed tiny footprints along the bank. They were smaller than the first ones, but still too perfect to be human. They paused at certain points, almost like someone or something was observing the water, maybe even playing, before moving on. The ranger smiled slightly. Even though it was mysterious, it felt friendly in a strange way. The watchers were clever, but they weren't cruel. They were patient teachers. They left patterns, signs, and hints for anyone who was paying attention. Every movement mattered. Every small detail had meaning. As he walked, he noticed more subtle patterns. Leaves had been stacked carefully on top of roots. Tiny stones were lined up along a branch. Some branches were bent into almost letter-like shapes, pointing in certain directions. The forest was like a puzzle, and he was being invited to solve it. He sketched
everything in his notebook. The sketches might help him understand the forest better, and maybe even learn how the Watchers thought. Time passed slowly. He paused often to observe the sunlight moving through the trees, to listen to the wind, and to notice the quiet sounds of the forest. Even the smallest rustle or distant bird call seemed important now. He realized that the Watchers had made the forest into a language of footprints, marks, shapes, and movements. If he paid attention, he could read it. By midday, he reached another clearing, slightly larger than the first. Sunlight shone in bright patches across the mossy ground. In the center, there was a circle of stones, larger than any he had seen before. Footprints surrounded the circle, forming perfect patterns. Some footprints were large, some small, and some seemed to circle around each other. He knelt down to study them. The Watchers had created a design, almost like a map, almost like a message. He photographed, sketched, and wrote notes in his notebook. He noticed more than just footprints. A faint rustle from the bushes nearby made him stop. Branches swayed slightly, and he thought he saw a small shadowy shape move. He froze, remembering the imitated voices from the night before. The Watchers could observe without being seen, imitate without touching, and teach without speaking. He smiled softly, realizing that he was learning their rules. He had to move carefully, notice every sign, and respect the forest. By late afternoon, the forest seemed to open up. The patterns led him to a gentle slope that descended toward a wider clearing. Sunlight spilled over the trees, creating bright patches on the ground. Here he noticed footprints, stones, and markers leading to a small stream hidden in the forest. The stream bubbled gently over rocks. Tiny footprints ran along the edge, pausing to touch the water, then disappearing back into the forest. The Watchers were everywhere, watching, learning, and leaving clues for him. He followed the path along the stream carefully. Every step felt meaningful. Every sound mattered. The rustle of leaves, the faint snap of a twig, the soft gurgle of the stream, all seemed connected. He took careful notes, drew sketches, and photographed each sign. He realized that the forest had become a classroom, and the Watchers were his teachers. They were showing him how to move safely, how to observe, and how to respect their territory. As the sun began to sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the ranger decided to return to his cabin. The forest had shared many secrets with him today, and he wanted to record every detail. On the walk back, he noticed even more small patterns, leaves arranged like arrows, small stones forming lines, and tiny footprints leading into the underbrush. Every sign was deliberate, every movement was careful. Back at his cabin, he reviewed his notes, sketches, and photographs. The patterns, footprints, and markers told him something very important. The Watchers were intelligent, patient, and deliberate. They were not trying to hurt anyone. They were teaching, guiding, and observing. The forest was alive with their presence, and he had only begun to understand it. That night, as he lay in bed, he imagined the footprints, the shapes of the branches, the stones, and the markers. He could almost hear the rustling of leaves, the gentle gurgle of the stream, and the soft, watchful presence of the forest around him. The Watchers were near, quietly observing, waiting, and teaching, and the ranger knew deep in his heart that his journey into the secrets of the Blue Ridge Forest was only beginning.
The morning after his discoveries of the footprints, the symbols, and the imitated voices, the ranger woke earlier than usual. Sunlight had not yet touched the peaks of the mountains, and a soft mist lingered over the Blue Ridge woods. He could hear the distant chirping of birds and the gentle rustle of leaves swaying in the morning breeze. Even before stepping outside, he felt that today would bring new secrets from the Watchers, the clever, quiet beings who had been observing him for days. He packed his backpack carefully, checking each item twice. Flashlight? Check. Extra batteries? Check. Notebook and pencils? Check. Magnifying glass? Check. Water and snacks? Check. The forest was alive with subtle sounds and movements, and he knew he would need all his tools to notice the smallest clues. With a deep breath, he stepped onto the trail, feeling the soft, damp soil beneath his boots. Each step made a gentle imprint, and he paused frequently, knowing that every detail could be important. The forest seemed quieter than usual, but in a good way. Not empty or still. Alive, yet calm. He noticed small movements in the trees, leaves fluttering gently, shadows shifting, and branches bending slightly, as though unseen eyes were observing him from above. The scent of pine and moss filled the air, mixed with the earthy aroma of wet soil. He inhaled deeply, trying to absorb every detail. The forest felt like a living puzzle, and the Watchers were patient teachers guiding him step by step. Almost immediately, he noticed a small pile of rocks carefully stacked beside a tree. At first glance, it looked ordinary, but upon closer inspection, he saw that the rocks formed a pattern. A triangle pointed toward a small path that branched off the main trail. The ranger knelt down, studying the rocks carefully.
He realized that the watchers had left this as a subtle hint, a gentle nudge for him to follow. Smiling, he stepped carefully onto the smaller path, feeling as though he were following the clues of an invisible friend. The ground along this path was soft and covered in leaves. He noticed footprints, some big, some small, some faint, some deep. They twisted around trees and over fallen branches. Some disappeared for a moment, then reappeared as if playing a game of hide and seek. The ranger paused at each print, tracing it with his fingers, sketching it in his notebook, and writing careful notes. He could feel the forest guiding him, teaching him patience and observation. Soon he came to a small clearing. Sunlight streamed through the trees, creating golden patches on the forest floor. In the center of the clearing, he saw a collection of sticks arranged into shapes, triangles, circles, and tiny arrows. Small piles of stones were positioned at careful intervals. The ranger knelt down, noting every detail. These were clearly deliberate puzzles, left by the watchers for him to observe. They weren't threatening, just clever, gentle teachers showing him how to notice and understand the forest. He noticed a small stream nearby, its water bubbling softly over smooth stones. Tiny footprints led from the clearing to the stream, and then back again. Some paused along the edge, as though someone or something had stopped to observe the water. He crouched low, studying the prints carefully. He realized that the watchers had created a pattern, almost like a gentle game or a test, to see if he could follow the clues without getting distracted. Hours passed as he moved carefully along the forest path. The sunlight shifted, casting moving patterns on the ground. Shadows lengthened, changed shape, and occasionally seemed to guide him towards subtle clues. Leaves had been stacked in small arrow shapes, sticks tied into tiny crosses, and stones arranged in lines. Each arrangement felt deliberate, each placement intentional. The ranger sketched and photographed everything, knowing that he might need to study these clues later. The forest seemed alive with these gentle puzzles. Every time he thought he had discovered all the clues, he found new ones, a spiral of stones hidden in a bed of moss, twigs placed in a zigzag, a series of footprints that curved around a tree in a perfect circle. The ranger realized that the watchers were not just intelligent, they were playful in a quiet, clever way. They wanted him to notice, to think, and to respect the forest while exploring. He stopped for a moment in a sunlit clearing and reflected. The forest had become a teacher, and the watchers were guides, invisible but patient. They had shown him patterns, footprints, shadows, and subtle signs over the past days. Everything had meaning. Every detail mattered. He realized that by observing carefully, he was slowly learning their language, a language of movement, placement, and timing. Continuing deeper into the forest, he noticed subtle rhythms in the patterns. Footprints would pause at certain spots. Stones would be arranged in a way that suggested direction. Leaves and moss were used to point toward paths or warn of places to avoid. Even the smallest shadows seemed to form gentle hints. The ranger began to anticipate what he would see next, feeling more confident yet increasingly respectful of the forest's invisible teachers. As afternoon turned toward evening, the ranger came to a gentle slope leading to a wider clearing. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting bright patches on the ground. He noticed a series of puzzles arranged carefully by the watchers. Footprints circled in spirals, stones were aligned in precise sequences, and sticks were tied into small shapes. He knelt down to study every detail, taking photographs, sketching the arrangements, and writing careful notes. Each arrangement seemed like a message, a story, or a puzzle meant for him to solve. He noticed movement at the edge of his vision, leaves brushing against each other, a shadow slipping between the trees, but nothing approached directly. The watchers were observing him, as they always did. The forest felt like a quiet classroom, filled with lessons for anyone who could see, listen, and understand. The ranger realized that every step, every pause, every observation mattered in this forest. By the time the sun began to sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in warm oranges and purples, the ranger made his way back to his cabin. He was tired but exhilarated. He had discovered more clues, patterns, and puzzles than ever before. He had traced footprints, examined stone arrangements, studied bent branches, and followed subtle markers leading him deeper into the forest. Each discovery had taught him something about patience, observation, and respect. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought about the tiny footprints, the spirals of stones, the arrows made of leaves, and the bent branches forming subtle signs. He could almost hear the soft rustling of leaves, the gentle gurgle of the stream, and the quiet, watchful presence of the watchers nearby. They were not dangerous. They were teachers, guides, and observers, and he knew that his journey into the secrets of the Blue Ridge Forest was only beginning. He drifted into sleep, imagining all the puzzles he had seen that day. Each pattern, each footprint, each stone arrangement would be a part of the next day's exploration. He knew he would wake early, pack his backpack, and step back into the living, breathing forest to continue learning from the clever, patient watchers who had made this world a puzzle waiting to be solved.
The ranger did not wake up suddenly that morning. He slowly opened his eyes, feeling calm and thoughtful. The lessons from the forest were still fresh in his mind. The hidden paths, the careful warnings, the rules made of leaves, stones, and silence. Today felt different. Not dangerous. Important. Outside his window, the sky was light gray. Clouds moved slowly, and the air felt heavy, as if the forest was holding its breath. The ranger dressed quietly and sat at the small table in his cabin. He opened his notebook and read what he had written the night before. Listen first. Respect the signs. Do not rush. He closed the notebook and took a deep breath. If there is something you want to show me, he said softly, I'm ready. The next morning, the ranger woke up feeling calm but curious. The forest had not scared him away. Instead, it had invited him back. He felt it in his chest, like a quiet pull, telling him there was more to learn. The watchers had shown him puzzles and patterns, and now he felt ready for the next lesson. Outside his cabin, the air was cool and fresh. Mist floated low between the trees like soft white clouds resting on the ground. The sun was slow to rise, and the forest was peaceful and quiet. Birds chirped gently, and somewhere far away, water trickled over rocks. The ranger stretched, took a deep breath, and began packing his backpack. He packed carefully, just like always. His flashlight, notebook, pencils, magnifying glass, water, and snacks all went inside. Before leaving, he paused at the door and looked toward the forest. It felt like the trees were watching him, not in a scary way, but in a curious way, almost like the forest was saying, "Come back, there's more to see." As he stepped onto the trail, something felt different. The path he had walked many times before seemed slightly changed, not broken or damaged, just different. Leaves were stacked neatly along the edge of the trail. Small stones lined the ground in gentle curves. Branches bent in ways that looked almost like arrows. The ranger stopped and smiled softly. "These are paths," he whispered to himself. Not normal paths made by people, but hidden paths made by the watchers. He followed one of the stone lines carefully. It led him off the main trail and into a quieter part of the forest. The ground here was softer, covered in moss and fallen leaves. His boots barely made a sound. The trees grew closer together, and sunlight slipped through in thin, golden lines. As he walked, he noticed footprints again. These were different from the ones before. They were smaller, lighter, and spaced very evenly. They did not rush or wander. They moved with purpose. The ranger crouched down to look closely. "These aren't random," he said softly. "They're leading somewhere." The footprints curved gently around trees and over roots. Sometimes they disappeared, but if he waited and looked carefully, he always found them again. The watchers were teaching him patience. If he rushed, he missed the signs. If he slowed down, the forest opened up.
Soon, the ranger noticed something amazing. The forest floor looked untouched, but when he paid attention, he could see a narrow path where leaves were pressed down just a little. Moss was brushed aside. Tiny twigs were moved out of the way. It was a hidden path, one that only someone watching carefully could see. He followed it slowly, feeling like he had stepped into a secret part of the forest. The air felt cooler here, the sounds were softer. Even the birds seemed quieter, as if they knew this place was special. As the ranger walked, he noticed markers along the way. A spiral made of stones near a tree, a branch tied gently with grass, a small pile of leaves shaped like an arrow. These were not warnings, they were guides. The watchers were showing him where to go. The path led to a small clearing hidden deep in the woods. Tall trees surrounded it, and sunlight spilled into the center like a warm spotlight. In the middle of the clearing was something incredible. A circle. Not just stones, everything formed a circle. Stones, sticks, leaves, and footprints all worked together. The ranger stood quietly at the edge, not stepping inside. He remembered the campsites. The watchers never stepped into the center. They always stayed around the edges. So he did the same. From where he stood, he could see patterns inside the circle. Lines pointed outward. Small gaps appeared between stones. Footprints stopped at certain points, as if marking something important. The ranger realized this was not just a puzzle. It was a map. A map of the forest, not drawn on paper, but built into the ground. He slowly walked around the outside, studying it from every angle. He sketched it carefully in his notebook. The more he looked, the more he understood. The watchers were showing him where the forest was safe, and where it was not. Some paths were marked clearly with smooth stones and gentle curves. Others were blocked with crossed sticks or scattered leaves. The forest had rules, and the watchers were teaching him how to follow them. A soft rustle came from the trees. The ranger stopped moving. Leaves shifted. A shadow passed behind a trunk. He did not turn quickly. He did not speak. He remembered what he had learned. Be calm. Be slow. Be respectful. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, but not frightening. It felt like someone checking his work, seeing if he understood the lesson. After a moment, the forest grew quiet again. The ranger let out a slow breath. He felt proud, not scared. The watchers trusted him enough to show him this place. He stayed a little longer, memorizing the patterns, then carefully backed away, leaving everything exactly as he found it. As he followed another hidden path, the forest began to change again. The ground sloped downward, and he heard water ahead. Soon he reached a narrow stream flowing gently between rocks. Footprints lined the bank, stopping at certain stones. He realized something important. The watchers were not just marking places, they were marking moments. Where to stop. Where to listen. Where to wait. The ranger sat on a rock and listened. The water flowed, leaves whispered. Somewhere nearby, a branch creaked softly. He felt peaceful. The forest was no longer just a mystery. It was a living story, and he was learning how to read it. As the sun moved lower in the sky, the ranger followed the hidden path back toward the main trail. Along the way, he noticed new signs, ones he would have missed before. A bent fern, a stone turned just slightly, a footprint half covered by leaves. He smiled. I see you. He whispered kindly. When he reached his cabin, he felt tired but happy. He spread his notebook on the table and reviewed his sketches. Hidden paths, forest maps, gentle rules, patient teachers. That night, as he lay in bed, he dreamed of winding trails and glowing clearings. He dreamed of footsteps walking beside him, not touching, not speaking, just guiding. The watchers were still out there. And tomorrow, they would show him even more.
That night, the ranger did not fall asleep right away. He lay quietly on his narrow bed inside the cabin, staring up at the wooden ceiling. The room was dim, lit only by soft moonlight slipping through the small window. Shadows moved slowly across the walls as tree branches swayed outside. The forest was awake. Not loudly, not urgently, just awake. The ranger listened. The sounds were soft and spaced far apart. The slow creak of the cabin settling, the distant call of an owl, the quiet brushing sound of leaves touching each other in the wind. Nothing dangerous, nothing sudden, yet his mind refused to rest. The warning from earlier that day stayed with him. The broken tree, the circle of footprints, the way the forest had gone silent, as if it had paused everything just to make sure he understood. This was not a message meant to scare him. It was a message meant to guide him. He turned onto his side and closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, but his thoughts continued drifting, slow and steady, like a river at night. He thought about his job. Being a park ranger was supposed to be simple. Protect the land, help visitors, keep trails safe, make sure people enjoyed nature without harming it. But the forest had shown him something deeper. Some places didn't need people to enjoy them. Some places needed to be left alone. As the night stretched on, the ranger began to realize something important. The forest wasn't asking him to fight. It wasn't asking him to expose secrets. It was asking him to choose carefully. Just before dawn, he finally drifted into sleep. And when he woke again, the sky outside was a soft gray blue. Morning was arriving slowly, quietly, the way the forest seemed to prefer. He sat up and stretched. His body felt calm, but his mind felt clear, like the answer had already been waiting for him. He made a cup of coffee and stood by the window, holding the warm mug in both hands. Steam rose gently into the cool morning air. Outside, the forest looked normal again. Birds hopped between branches. Insects hummed. Sunlight filtered through the trees, touching leaves and moss. Anyone else would have thought the forest was peaceful. The ranger knew it was watchful. He opened his notebook and sat at the small wooden table. He flipped through pages filled with notes and sketches, footprints drawn carefully, maps with markings, words written slowly, chosen with care. Every page told the same story. The forest didn't want attention. It wanted balance. The ranger leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling again. If he told everything, every detail, to his supervisors, things would change fast. Scientists would arrive. Equipment would be set up. Trails would widen. More people would come. Curious people. Careless people. People who didn't listen. The forest would lose its voice. But if he stayed silent completely, hikers could wander too far. Campers could cross lines they didn't know existed. Someone could get hurt. Not because the forest was cruel, but because people didn't understand its rules. That was the choice. Speak too loudly, or guide quietly. The ranger finished his coffee and stood up. He already knew what he would do. That morning he walked the trail slowly. He didn't rush. He moved with purpose, but also with respect. He studied the paths the way he always had, but now he saw them differently. Some trails felt welcoming. Others felt closed. Not blocked by fallen trees or rocks, but closed in a deeper way. The air felt heavier. The forest felt older there. Those were the places he marked. He removed a few trail signs, carefully and cleanly. Not enough for people to panic, just enough to keep them from wandering too far. He placed simple warnings where they mattered most. Trail closed. Unsafe conditions. No camping beyond this point. No explanations. No stories. Just clear direction.
As he worked, the forest responded in small ways. A breeze moved through the trees, slow and gentle. Leaves rustled softly, like quiet approval. A deer stood at a distance, watching calmly before stepping back into the woods. The ranger felt it again, that sense of being observed. But this time it felt peaceful. By afternoon, his work was done. He stood at the edge of a trail and looked into the forest. Shadows stretched between the trees, deep and layered. Somewhere far inside, the watchers remained. Silent, patient, aware. The ranger didn't try to see them. He didn't need to. He raised his hand slightly. Not a wave, not a signal, just a simple gesture of respect. "I'll keep them safe," he said quietly, "and I'll keep others away." The forest did not answer with sound. Instead, the wind passed gently through the trees, steady and calm. That night when the ranger returned to his cabin, he felt lighter. The choice had been made. The balance had been restored, at least for now. He lay down and closed his eyes. Outside, the forest watched and waited.
The days that followed passed slowly. Not in a boring way, not in a heavy way. They passed the way clouds drift across the sky, quietly, gently, without needing attention. The ranger felt the change almost immediately. The forest was no longer tense. It no longer felt like it was waiting to warn him or test him. Instead, it felt steady, balanced, like something important had finally been set in place. Each morning, the ranger woke just before sunrise. The light outside his cabin was soft and pale, slowly spreading through the trees. The air felt cool and clean as he stepped outside, breathing deeply. Birds greeted the day one by one. First a single call, then another, then many voices blending together. The ranger stood still and listened. This had become his new habit. Before checking trails, before writing reports, before speaking to anyone, he listened. Listening had become the first rule. Not just listening with ears, but with patience. Some mornings felt normal, calm, easy. Those days passed without trouble. Other mornings felt slightly different. The sounds were there, but softer. The wind moved, but slower. Those were the days he took extra care. The forest spoke in patterns, and he was learning to read them. As days turned into weeks, the ranger adjusted how he worked. He didn't announce changes loudly. He didn't make dramatic decisions. Instead, he worked quietly. A trail sign moved a few feet closer to the main path. A campsite closed for maintenance. A map updated with fewer details in certain areas. Nothing that caused questions. Nothing that caused panic. Just gentle guidance. Visitors still came to enjoy the forest. Families walked easy trails. Campers stayed in open areas. Children laughed near streams, skipping stones across the water. The ranger watched them with a calm eye. He wanted people to enjoy the forest, just not all of it. Some parts needed rest. Some parts needed silence. Some parts needed to be remembered, not visited. At night, the ranger often sat outside his cabin. He didn't bring a flashlight unless he needed it. He let his eyes adjust naturally to the darkness. The stars above the Blue Ridge Mountains were bright and steady. The forest below them breathed slowly, like it was sleeping. Sometimes he felt movement deeper among the trees. Not footsteps, not danger, just presence. The watchers were still there. They always would be. But now they stayed deeper in the forest. They didn't follow him. They didn't circle campsites.
They didn't leave warnings where people walked. They trusted him. That trust felt heavy, but also right. One evening, the ranger noticed fresh footprints near a closed trail. Long, deep, careful. He stopped. He didn't approach. He didn't write anything down. He simply adjusted the nearby sign, turning it slightly so the trail entrance was less visible. Then he stepped away. By morning, the footprints were gone. That became another rule. Never challenge what already understands you. The ranger learned to let things be. Not everything needed answers. Not everything needed proof. Some things only needed respect. As the seasons shifted, the forest grew richer. Leaves changed color. The air cooled. Mornings smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves. The ranger felt more at home than ever. He realized something important during one quiet afternoon patrol. He wasn't guarding the forest from people. He was guarding people from the forest's deeper truths. And that was okay. Not everyone needed to know everything. That night, sitting on the cabin steps, he watched the moon rise slowly above the trees. The forest glowed softly in silver light. Shadows stretched long and calm. The ranger rested his elbows on his knees and breathed. No fear. No urgency. No questions. Only quiet understanding. The forest had rules long before humans arrived. Rules written in stone and root and time. And now, someone was finally listening. The ranger closed his eyes and let the night sounds wash over him. Somewhere deep in the woods, the watchers stood silent and still, doing what they had always done. Watching. Waiting. And trusting.
The ranger woke up before the sun. The sky outside his cabin was still dark blue, and the stars were slowly fading. He lay quietly for a moment, listening. The forest was never truly silent. Leaves rustled softly. A distant owl hooted. Somewhere far away, water moved over rocks. He smiled softly. The forest felt familiar now. Not safe in the way a house is safe, but safe in the way a classroom feels when you understand the lesson. The watchers had been teaching him slowly. Footprints. Patterns. Puzzles. Hidden paths. And now he felt it was time to learn something very important. The rules. He dressed quietly and packed his backpack. He did not rush. The watchers noticed rushing. They noticed fear. They noticed carelessness. Today, he moved with calm purpose. When he stepped outside, the air felt cool and clean. A thin fog rested low on the ground, wrapping around tree trunks like soft scarves. The ranger took a deep breath and walked toward the forest. Almost right away, he noticed something new. The trail was different again. Not blocked, not broken, but changed. where the ground had once been open. Fallen branches now crossed the path. Leaves were piled high in some places. Stones sat in firm lines, not pointing forward, but sideways. The ranger stopped. This was not a puzzle. This was a warning. He knelt down and studied the signs. Crossed branches meant do not continue. Piled leaves meant turn back. Stones placed tightly together meant this place is closed. The watchers were clear. Some paths were not meant to be walked. The ranger felt a small shiver. Not from fear, but from understanding. The forest had rules just like people did. Some places were safe. Some were not. And the watchers were protecting something. Or someone. He slowly stepped away from the blocked path and waited. After a few moments, he noticed another set of signs nearby. This time, stones were spaced gently. Leaves were arranged like arrows. A bent branch pointed toward a different trail. The forest was saying, "Not that way. This way." He followed the allowed path carefully. As he walked, he paid attention to everything. The ground, the trees, the air. He noticed that the forest felt calmer here. The light came through more easily. The sounds were softer. Birds chirped gently. The path felt welcoming. Soon, he came across something surprising. A place where people had once been. It was an old campsite. Very old. The fire pit was cold and covered in moss. A broken chair lay on its side. The ranger stopped at the edge, just like he always did. And then he saw the signs. Footprints circled the campsite, but never went inside. Sticks were placed carefully around the edge. Not messy. Not angry. Careful. The watchers had been watching, but they had not touched anything. The ranger finally understood. The forest rules were not about harm. They were about balance. The watchers did not attack people. They observed them. They warned them. And when people ignored the signs, the forest closed itself off. The ranger sat on a fallen log nearby and wrote in his notebook. Rule 1. The forest watches first. Rule 2. Warnings always come before danger. Rule 3. Respect keeps you safe. As if the forest heard his thoughts, a gentle breeze passed through the trees. Leaves swayed softly. A branch creaked nearby. He looked up and smiled. I understand, he whispered. As the day went on, he saw more examples of the rules. In one area, footprints stopped suddenly and turned back. The ranger followed their path and found a steep drop hidden under leaves. If someone had walked there without paying attention, they could have been hurt. The watchers had marked it.
place, stones formed a loose circle near a stream. Inside the circle, the ground was soft and unstable. Outside it, the earth was firm. A lesson. Pay attention, or the forest will teach you the hard way. The ranger realized that the watchers were guardians. Quiet ones. They did not speak loudly. They did not chase or scare. They taught by signs, by patterns, by patience. And most people never noticed. Later that afternoon, the ranger noticed something else. Footprints walking beside his own. Not overlapping. Now crossing. Walking with him. He stopped. The footprint stopped. He took one step forward. Another footprint appeared beside his. His heart beat faster. Not in fear, but in wonder. The watchers were not hiding now. They were acknowledging him. "You're showing me," he whispered softly. "Now listen." The footprints turned gently toward a clearing he had never seen before. The ranger followed slowly. In the clearing, the sunlight was warm. Stones formed a wide circle. Inside, nothing was disturbed. Outside, the forest felt calm. This was a place of peace. A place the watchers protected. The ranger did not step inside. He sat at the edge and simply watched. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. And yet he felt surrounded. Now crowded. Not threatened. Just observed. The forest rules were clear now. Do not rush. Do not take. Do not enter where you are not invited. Listen before you act. As the sun began to set, the ranger stood and quietly left the clearing. He followed the allowed paths back to his cabin, noticing how easily the forest guided him now. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought about everything he had learned. The watchers were not monsters. They were not ghosts. They were keepers of the forest. And the forest had rules for a reason. Tomorrow, he knew, the lessons would grow deeper. Because once you learn the rules, the forest begins to test you.
The forest was quiet in a way that made the ranger's skin prickle. Even the usual sounds of birds and insects seemed to have disappeared. Leaving only the whisper of leaves rustling in a faint breeze. The sun, still low in the sky, cast long shadows that stretched like fingers across the forest floor. Every tree trunk looked taller, darker, and somehow more alive.